If you've been tracking the U.S. Iran relationship, you know the volatility is usually measured in, well, months. But recently, the friction hasn't just been rumbling. It accelerated into a full-on geopolitical sprint.
Exactly. Over a window of just 48 hours, we saw this incredible shift in tension that created immediate whiplash.
And it sent, very real shockwaves across global markets.
Absolutely.
So we took a deep dive into the stack of sources detailing these rapid-fire events of January 13th and the days right before it. This material, it includes official statements, direct threats, some delivered through diplomatic channels, others on social media.
And of course, the financial fallout as traders just scrambled to react.
Our mission today is pretty simple. We're analyzing this material to give you the shortcut to understanding the precise moment the temperature jumped from, negotiation chatter to outright withdrawal warning.
Right. We're unpacking the exact quotes and actions that really define this critical escalation point.
What stands out in the source material is just how sharp this pivot was. For a brief moment, diplomacy seemed, remotely possible.
It did. But then, within hours, the door was slammed shut by Washington, and that resulted in significant, measurable volatility. To really be well-informed here, you need to grasp the immediate synchronization of actions.
What do you mean by synchronization?
I mean the specific policies from the U.S. and the specific threats from Tehran that happened almost at the same time. It's that parallel escalation that's so striking. We should probably start with the event that really triggered the chaos.
The sudden policy reversal on January 13th?
Exactly that.
And that moment arrived directly via social media. U.S. President Trump stated clearly and very publicly on January 13th that he had canceled all scheduled meetings with Iranian officials.
Not just postponed, canceled.
Canceled. This wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a leak. It was a definitive public declaration that talks were simply off.
And this is where the timeline becomes so striking.
Yeah.
Because this cancellation just flew directly in the face of what was happening literally 2 days prior.
Right. Our sources confirm that on January 11th, Trump himself had mentioned that talks were being arranged.
He even suggested that Iran had allegedly reached out to U.S. officials to start the dialogue.
To go from meetings are being arranged to all meetings are canceled in a blink, that shows a staggering speed of diplomatic breakdown.
And that diplomatic U-turn provided immediate proof of severity in the financial markets. The second, the prospect of high-level dialogue just vanished. The risk premium on global energy, it just soared.
Oh, absolutely. WTI crude oil futures prices experienced a very sharp short-term surge right after the news.
It wasn't a gentle uptick, was it?
Not at all. To give you the specifics, the price briefly touched $61.01 per barrel. That represents a spike of 3.0% almost immediately.
Wow.
It settled slightly lower, around $60.09 a barrel, but still, that 3% movement in crude oil that fast, it's a loud signal. It tells you traders are anticipating immediate supply disruption, not some future theoretical risk.
This is cash moving and moving quickly. And beyond the immediate financial fallout, the U.S. security posture also hardened. Immediately. Physically.
Oh, so?
The U.S. government issued a clear security warning, urging U.S. citizens to leave Iran right away. What's important is the specificity of the advice.
Okay.
They suggested U.S. citizens consider land routes, like through Turkey or Armenia, if they felt the safety risk allowed it. This signals a shift from just monitoring to, active, urgent concern.
And that warning wasn't just internal, right? We saw the president deliver very public, very direct advice to U.S. allies.
Yes, while he was speaking in Detroit, he openly suggested that allies should withdraw from Iran, calling the move a good idea.
That public urging, that feels like a massive step. It's not just the U.S. retreating. It's a public signal to international partners that the region is about to become hostile.
It's compelling them to choose sides immediately. Yeah. This public advice signals a deep level of concern within the administration. So we have the diplomatic channel closed, market spiking, and allies being told to pack up.
So let's dig into the official U.S. stance at that moment. What was the White House actually saying about their long-term intentions?
That's where the messaging becomes really complex. Almost intentionally contradictory, you could say.
How so?
We reviewed the statements. On January 12th, the White House press secretary, Leavitt, stated that diplomacy was the preferred option, which, sounds cautious and measured.
But there was a but.
A very big one. Leavitt immediately followed up by emphasizing that the president would not hesitate to use U.S. troops if necessary. This shows a very strategic dual messaging.
Right, trying to maintain the high ground of preferring peace while at the same time projecting full military readiness.
That dual messaging is critical. Our sources suggest it serves two purposes. First, it reassures allies who prefer a diplomatic outcome. And second, it maintains that deterrent ambiguity against Tehran.
So by keeping peace on the table, they avoid being labeled the aggressor. But the threat ensures Tehran takes their demands seriously.
Exactly. So the cancellation wasn't just an impulsive move. It seems like it was the formalization of a strategic shift that was already being planned.
And what else were they planning?
Well, if we connect this to the broader picture, we know the U.S. was considering a series of measures beyond just diplomacy or sanctions. The source material refers to possible military action and some very strong options.
Very strong options suggest they were preparing for scenarios that went beyond traditional pressure points.
It certainly does. And that preparation was formalized right at the moment of the cancellation. Reports indicated that the president's national security team was scheduled to hold a meeting on January 13th.
The same day the talks were canceled.
The very same day, to discuss an updated version of plans for the situation.
An updated version. That suggests a rapid transition from planning for potential talks to planning for a serious confrontation.
It makes the cancellation seem like the first official action in a newly adopted strategy.
Okay, so the U.S. was loading the diplomatic gun with both dialogue and deterrent options. But conflict is never a monologue. We need to look at Iran's response, which was equally layered, maybe even more explicit in its threats.
Right.
We've seen the U.S. prepare for war. What do our sources tell us about Iran's response? They seemed ready for both negotiation and conflict.
They did. Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi stated on January 12th that Iran is ready for negotiation with the U.S. based on mutual respect.
That sounds like a diplomatic opening.
It does, but that message was immediately undercut by a very clear declaration of readiness. Araghchi simultaneously declared that they are ready for war.
So just like the U.S., Iran is maintaining that critical dual posture, showing a pathway out while standing ready for the worst-case scenario.
Exactly.
This raises a really important question. What exactly were the consequences of war, according to Tehran, in this newly heightened environment?
On January 13th, Iranian Defense Minister Nasirzadeh provided a significant military warning. He stated clearly that if the enemy invades Iranian territory, Iran will respond with stronger intensity.
That's a pretty standard deterrent posture.
It is.
Yeah.
But here is the specific nugget that fundamentally changes the regional risk calculus, and this is what you absolutely need to remember from the source material. Nasirzadeh issued a crucial, expanded threat.
Okay.
He explicitly warned that all U.S. military bases in the region, that's expected, as well as countries providing facilities or convenience for the U.S., will be considered legitimate targets for Iranian strikes.
Wait, hold on. The inclusion of countries providing convenience, that is a staggering expansion of the threat zone.
It is.
It's no longer just about direct U.S. military bases. It ropes in potentially every U.S. host nation, every logistics hub, every port of call in the region. What key U.S. allies does this immediately put at risk?
This broad language instantly puts allies like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, even Turkey on notice.
And the term convenience is so intentionally vague.
It is. It allows Iran to define an aggressive action as something as simple as allowing U.S. refueling or logistical overflight. That becomes a legitimate military target. This dramatically complicates the decisions for U.S. allies.
That move is pure escalation. It's an attempt to strategically isolate the U.S. by threatening its partners. What else did Iran claim about its readiness? I mean, if they're making threats of that magnitude.
Nasirzadeh also commented on Iran's current defense capability, claiming it has significantly improved since a previous regional incident.
Okay.
He stated that current defense capabilities are significantly better than they were during the 12-day war that followed an alleged Israeli raid back in June.
And for those who might not be familiar with that reference, the 12-day war was that period of intense friction that occurred after an alleged Israeli raid earlier in the year, which reportedly damaged several strategic sites.
Exactly. Nasirzadeh added that damaged facilities have been repaired and production capacity boosted. This is Tehran attempting to project confidence and strength at the precise moment it is making these highly specific and very expansive military threats.
So while this external tension was hitting a fever pitch, it is absolutely critical to remember that the regime was dealing with massive internal instability at the same time.
A very volatile domestic backdrop.
We learned there were ongoing protests across multiple areas in Iran over rising prices and currency devaluation. This had escalated to the point of riots and had resulted in casualties.
That internal pressure puts enormous strain on the regime, while they're simultaneously preparing for this possible confrontation with the U.S.
So how did the regime respond to this domestic unrest?
Well, their response was decisive, and it involved severe accusations directed outwards, effectively linking the internal dissent to an external conspiracy. On January 13th, the Iranian police announced the arrest of 297 individuals.
And they termed them troublemakers or rioters.
Right. And the narrative they attached to those arrests is what's truly revealing.
What were these 297 people accused of?
The sources state these individuals were accused of having ties to U.S.-affiliated violent organizations and the Israeli Zionist regime. They were reportedly targeting public facilities, religious sites, security forces. This isn't just an internal police matter. This is the regime explicitly framing domestic instability rooted in economic distress as foreign-backed terrorism.
That is a classic move to justify a crackdown and rally internal support against an external enemy.
It is. And Iranian Foreign Minister Arachi quickly reinforced that framing, specifically blaming the U.S. and Israel for holding direct responsibility for the events happening inside Iran.
So it ties the internal economic problem directly into the larger, escalating international conflict narrative.
Yes, it allows them to manage the domestic dissent while simultaneously hardening their posture toward Washington and its allies, claiming their foreign adversaries are actively trying to destabilize the country.
This brings us to the broader international reaction. When two adversarial powers escalate this quickly, the rest of the world is forced to take a position, even a neutral one. We have a source covering China's position here.
A major global power, right?
Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Mao Ning released a statement on January 13th that offered some crucial context. She stated clearly that China supports Iran maintaining national stability.
Which is a quiet but firm position.
Yeah.
It's essentially pushing back against the idea of foreign intervention during a period of severe domestic volatility in Iran.
And they reinforce their overarching principles, which speaks directly to that U.S. dual messaging of diplomacy preferred, backed by military force.
Right. China reiterated its opposition to interfering in the internal affairs of other nations, and, importantly, opposition to using or threatening to use force in international relations.
It's a clear, principled statement in the face of all this escalating military rhetoric from both sides. China also confirmed its own protective measures, committing to taking all necessary steps to protect the safety of its citizens.
And what's important to reinforce here for you is that our analysis strictly adheres to reporting the source material provided. We're not endorsing any specific political viewpoint.
We're just presenting the synchronized, volatile shifts that occurred in the political and financial landscape during those crucial hours.
Exactly. We've traced the timeline from talks being on the calendar to all meetings canceled, watched the oil markets react instantly, heard the U.S. advise allies to withdraw, and then heard Iran explicitly name allied countries as legitimate targets. It was just a pressure cooker environment.
So, to synthesize the key takeaway for you, the stack of sources illustrates an immediate, synchronized escalation. The U.S. pivoted from tentative talks to advising its partners to pack up and leave.
While Iran simultaneously amplified its rhetoric regarding the targeting of U.S. assets and, crucially, U.S. allies by using that expansive language about countries providing convenience.
The speed and the breadth of that threat, that's what really defines this moment.
The simultaneous hardening of the U.S. stance and the widening of Iran's threat map. It indicates that the geopolitical risk assessment for the entire region just spiked substantially.
And this leads us to our final thought for you to chew on. Given Iran's explicit claim of improved defense capability and its explicit targeting of countries that host U.S. facilities, not just U.S. troops, but the convenience provided by the host, how might this specific expanded threat calculation change the geopolitical dynamics for U.S. allies operating in the region?
Will those allies decide the cost of providing that convenience to the U.S. is simply too high? That's something worth exploring further.
Until the next deep dive, keep questioning.
We'll see you then.